I've worked with athletes that are really good and they have become great just by fine tuning little things. I mean, to athletes, it's really how much protein is necessary for different goals. So is the zero 0.8 grams per kilogram need. And we now know that that's way too low, but the recommendations officially haven't changed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on today. And thank you for
having me.
accepting my invitation. Can you? So joining me today is Jennifer O'Donnell Giles. Is that how have I said that right?
Yeah. You can say O'Donnell Giles, or if you want to keep it easy, you can say Jennifer Giles.
Okay. So joining me today is Jennifer Giles, nutritionist for athletes and sports dietitian.
Yeah.
Would you be able to kind of give me a background of how you got involved in sports nutrition and becoming a dietitian for athletes?
For sure. Yeah. Well, I was a high school athlete and I was just okay. I knew I had more to give. I just didn't really know how to get there. And then once I went to college, I started running just on my own because I literally got up one day and said, I think I want to run. So I started running and I loved it immediately and I just got hooked. But I thought to myself, I wonder if I changed my diet a little bit, if I could get faster, stronger. So that kind of snowballed into this whole deep dive of research about how nutrition impacts running. And I did have a lot of success in running. I ultimately became a triathlete and really got big into races, marathons, Ironmans. And then I thought, you know what? I love this so much and it has changed my life so much that this is what I want to do. I'm going to help others realize that nutrition can make you the best athlete you possibly can be. So now I just work with all types of athletes, youth athletes, adult athletes. You know, it could be an athlete trying to get into college for sports. It could be an adult athlete training for a triathlon. It could be anyone that just wants to get healthy and really realize how the nutrition and exercise component work together to magnify performance. And it's just really been such a great ride. I loved it every step of the way.
Does the diet play a huge role in becoming for an athlete from becoming just good to great to excellent?
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with athletes that are okay, and they become really good. I've worked with athletes that are really good and they have become great just by fine tuning little things. I mean, obviously genetics plays a huge role in it. And obviously talent is talent. You can't mess with that, but you can make any athlete better just by optimizing nutrition.
Do people come to you quite often with having done fad diets? Like obviously because of social media and everything going on around it, you have diets like vegan diet, carnivore, keto, and I'm sure there's 100 other ones that I probably haven't named. Do athletes come to you with a preconceived notion of, I want to do this because I've heard it somewhere else and I want to do it, and then do you kind of have to set them on the right path towards something else?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of athletes or even non-athletes have tried a fad diet at some point in time because they heard it from their friend or their teammate or maybe a coach or a parent saying, let's try this. They really have little knowledge of what that fad diet is doing. They're just doing it because they heard it from someone. So what I do is I break down the science behind it and the research behind it. And it all depends on what the athlete's goal is. You know, if the goal of an athlete is to get more powerful and they're doing intermittent fasting, they're going to actually lose some energy and power because they're not eating at certain times of the day, not really fueling their performance properly. And once they learn that and then learn the better way, the correct way, then they kind of know that, oh, this is a fad. And this is just because somebody wanted me to buy some kind of supplement or some kind of program. And it's not really the right science-based way to eat. Fads come and go over the years. I've been doing this 25 years, and fads really are just the same thing recycled as different names. And we've learned so much about them. And I think it's just human nature.
Can you kind of go back to where you started from?
Sure. Fad diets. So yeah, a lot of athletes come to me having done a fad diet or having questions about a fad diet. Should they try it? You know, they heard a teammate or a coach or a parent say that they should try this fad diet. We'll choose intermittent fasting, for example. Well, if it's an athlete that's really trying to improve their power output, then intermittent fasting is not going to be the best choice for them because they're not going to be fueled well enough in order to train to their highest capacity. So, in that sense, they've heard something about a certain fad diet, but they haven't heard it specific to their goals. And I think that's the key with sports nutrition is everybody's body is so different. We all need different things at different times in different quantities. And unless the athlete understands what their body needs, they really have to kind of quiet the noise that's out there on social media and that they're hearing from other people. And once they really understand what their body needs, then they know that a fad diet is likely not going to be the answer.
So just going back to power and wanting to increase the power, how would an athlete optimize their diet to give themselves maximum advantage when power increasing the power is the ultimate output?
Yeah. So when you think about it from a cellular level, if we want to create more power, we need more lean muscle mass. So if we have more lean muscle mass in terms, in comparison to say fat mass, water mass has to be optimized also when it comes to lean muscle mass. But if our goal is power output, we need to build lean muscle mass. So that's a process. So
Okay.
it's not taking a pill and feeling more powerful. It is over the series of months or even years, eating in a way that ensures that lean muscle mass is going to increase, and then over time power will increase as well.
Okay, so just staying on this topic of lean muscle mass, how would an athlete optimize, say, carbs, protein, and fat to make sure that, once again, lean muscle mass, building lean muscle mass is what's optimized?
Mhm. This is a great question. So there's three macronutrients:
Yeah,
protein, fat, and carbohydrate. We need all of them. All of them are involved in building lean muscle mass. We need them at different percentages. And believe it or not, we need them to shift percentage wise at different times during the day as it refers to your training schedule. So we need a little bit more carbohydrate in reference, in comparison to fat and protein before a training session, and higher in protein after a training session. Not that you don't need carbohydrates and fats at every time. We're just increasing and decreasing the percentages
yeah.
before versus after a training session.
Okay, so um, I'm probably kind of going through a stage now where probably like a couple of years ago, I I was someone who would do intermittent fasting, and again, I'd probably fallen kind of victim to all of the noise on social media, and kind of had this mindset that carbohydrates were some kind of demon to be looked at when
Mm-hmm.
optimizing your nutrition. And now I'm kind of realizing that actually trying to build lean muscle mass and increase power output, you need carbohydrates, which is actually quite important to make sure you have enough energy during your workouts and recovery, and even optimizing your sleep as well, which is something I never thought about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And very important part of recovery is sleep. So getting quality sleep is important for recovery, which is also linked to building lean muscle mass. So yes,
Yeah,
it's all very important. It all plays a role together.
yeah, I think probably in today's culture, there's a kind of tendency to not get enough sleep and hustle culture and grinding hard. But I think optimizing sleep is something people are probably going to miss out on quite a lot nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, but you're right. Carbohydrates are linked to that too. So we know that on low carb diets or intermittent fasting diets, we know that sleep is affected because carbohydrates fuel our brain. It's the first nutrient that your brain looks to for energy. And if it's not there, it's going to start breaking down lean muscle mass in order to make carbohydrate or glucose rather. And that's going to fuel your brain. So now what we're doing when we're decreasing the amount of carbohydrates that we're intaking, we're actually losing muscle mass instead
Yeah,
of building it.
yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize that when they follow diets like intermittent fasting or keto.
Mhm.
That's called gluconeogenesis, right? Where
Yes, you got it.
where carbohydrates where protein is broken down into carbohydrates.
Mhm.
Um, so how much of an importance do the micronutrients play in an athlete's nutrition compared to the macronutrients? Is that something that needs to be optimized as well, or can supplements be enough?
That's also a great question. So I like to call the macronutrients the big guys. Macro, they're big, right? They're the ones that give us energy. They're the only ones that are measured in calories. Calories is a measurement of energy. So those are the nutrients that are giving us energy. Micronutrients, which is all your vitamins and minerals, are not, they don't give us energy. They're not measured in calories. They don't have any calories. They're measured in a different measurement, but I like to call them the worker bees. So what they do is they help the macronutrients do what they need to do. They help protein lay down muscle mass. They help fat do its anti-inflammation work. They help carbohydrates get to where they need to go. So they're doing the work. The macronutrients are what they're doing the work for. So yes, they're just as important. And actually, in terms of athletes' needs, micronutrient needs, well, both micronutrient and macronutrient needs are higher in athletes because there's just a lot more cell turnover in athletes. We're doing a lot more work every single day, day after day. And because of our goals of building lean muscle mass, decreasing fat mass, endurance, power, all the things we're asking our bodies to do require more nutrients to do that. So our needs are higher as well.
So compared to just a regular person, how much more of a percentage increase in micronutrients does an athlete need?
It really depends. Honestly, that's a hard one to answer because everyone's needs are different and it also differs depending on the day. So, if it's I'll take triathlon, for example. If it's a triathlete that's training for an Ironman and they have a huge weekend coming up of training, their percentage going into that big training weekend is going to be higher than a week where they're on a recovery week or a taper week. It's just going to be, everything's going to be a little bit different. If it's a high school athlete, and they're in their off season, their needs are going to be a little bit lower because they're just not putting the time or intensity or duration to training. So it kind of shifts depending on the season, and it definitely shifts depending on the individual. And there's no definitive percentage increase for micronutrients or macronutrients. It's really something that reflects a training cycle.
Okay, kind of just still staying on triathlons to marathons. Is there
Mhm.
a difference in the nutrition approach for someone who's competing for a triathlon versus a marathon, or do the nutrition kind of stay quite similar?
It's similar in terms of the foundational recommendations. So we all need a foundation of lean proteins, complex carbohydrates, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fat. So we need a balance of those nutrients every single day: fruits, vegetables, grains. We need a balance so that we're getting an optimal amount of every single nutrient that our body needs.
Yeah.
But in terms of specific sports or specific athletes' needs, it does differ because you'll have, say, a power athlete, like a football player, who really needs short bursts of energy and a lot of power, and maintaining a lot of lean muscle mass so that they can produce that power. So that their percentages of protein, healthy fats, overall calorie needs are going to be higher depending on obviously the training cycle where they're training. An athlete that's an endurance trained athlete, like a triathlete, marathoner, is going to need definitely all of those nutrients, but they're also going to need a higher focus on in training fueling. So not only are they going to need to worry about nutrition going into a big training weekend or a big training session, but they also need to top that off during their training, because if they're going out for 6-hour bike ride, they can't do that without any fuel. So they have to be really cognizant of what they need every hour while they're out there on that long bike ride. Whereas a football player might not necessarily need that. They may need to optimize their hydration during a training session and maybe have some carbohydrates if it's a long training session, but they don't need to focus as much on it
Okay,
during training.
kind of staying on this. How Well, how long does it take for someone who's competing in a triathlon to kind of just use up all of their muscle glycogen and um, refuel during the race?
Mm, good question. So it's really different because everyone's metabolic rate is different. Each one of us burns through proteins, carbs, and fat a little bit different rate. But in general, you really want to refuel every 45 to 60 minutes. And really, that's a hard question to answer too, because it depends on what they're ingesting. So if you're just ingesting carbohydrate during a long bike ride, let's say, you're going to burn through that pretty fast. If you're burning carbohydrate and protein with that carbohydrate, it's going to slow down the absorption and you're going to be able to go a little bit longer without refueling. So it depends on the athlete, what they're using for fuel, how long they're going to be out there, what they had before the session. So there's a lot of little different variations on athletes and what they do in order to make really detailed recommendations on how often they should be refueling.
Okay. You're talking about the difference between monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. Can you talk a bit more in detail about that? Why would an athlete need it, and what role does it play in a person's overall diet?
Yeah, so fat in general is a macronutrient, and it's the highest macronutrient in calories. So it's providing us more energy per gram than carbohydrates and proteins. So it's going to last a little bit longer in terms of being more satiating and fueling us a little bit better. Now, they play many different roles in terms of our overall health. They provide lubrication for our joints. They're a building block for hormones. So when we're talking about muscle building, that's part of that whole process. Like I said, they keep us fuller. They protect our skin. So they provide some nutrition for our skin, our hair, and nails. They are cardioprotective. So as athletes, our heart is our engine. So if we're strengthening that heart muscle and making sure we're protecting it, that's super important. So the thing with fat is we want to consume the proper kind of fat, or more of the good kind of fat than the bad kind of fat. Now, with any kind of fat, you're going to have a ratio of all three: saturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fat. We want a higher percentage of monos and polys than saturated. And that really comes down to the fact that saturated fat is inflammatory and unsaturated fat is anti-inflammatory. So we want to keep
Okay.
total body inflammation down when we're training, because when we're training, we're creating inflammation, and healthy fats, monounsaturated fats, can help decrease that inflammation in a natural way.
Okay. So kind of staying on this, what are some sources for the right kind of fats you're talking about, the polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats?
Yeah. So the best sources are avocados, nuts, olive oil, salmon, and any kind of other nuts and seeds like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds. All of those foods are really high in omega-3 fats, which are your monounsaturated fats that are going to help with inflammation. Really good sources.
Okay. So what about fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel? Would they also come under poly and monounsaturated fats?
Yes,
Because
yes, yep. And salmon is the fish that's highest in monounsaturated fat.
okay,
Any deep water fish, you're gonna get a good percentage of your healthy fats.
okay, and why is that?
It's just naturally occurring in the fish, and it's based on a lot of the algae that they're eating and processing, and that stays within the fish. And then when we eat it, we consume that as well.
Okay, brilliant. So where does red meat and chicken, right, white meats kind of fit into this? I'm assuming they come under saturated fats, right?
Well, red meat would, unless you're choosing a really lean cut of red meat, and then you're not going to have a whole lot of saturated fat. But there are higher fat red meats that, yes, are mostly saturated fat. Chicken and other white meats, turkey, have a very low amount of saturated fat, almost none, to be honest. So, but they also don't have a lot of unsaturated fat either. There's just not a lot of fat in lean chicken and
Okay.
other white meats. So if you're going to have, say, a grilled chicken, which is very popular among athletes, you still have to be cognizant of adding a monounsaturated fat to that meal, whether it be avocados or maybe having a salad on the side with olive oil based dressing, because that's going to help balance that meal. So when you're choosing foods that are really low in fat, you just have to be able to be knowledgeable of adding fat to that dish.
Okay. So how much of a myth is, or well, is it not, something like grass-fed beef? Does the fat in grass-fed beef have a lot of micronutrients that are quite beneficial, or is the increase quite negligible? Is it not even worth mentioning?
No, I actually think it makes a big difference. Any time when you're eating animal proteins, you're going to want to know how that animal was raised and what that animal was consuming, because it's very much going to affect the nutrient value of that animal that you're consuming.
Okay. So what kind of nutrients, micronutrients, do grass-fed beef have compared to grain-fed beef then?
They're going to have a higher percentage of B vitamins, which is really the biggest thing that we look at. B vitamins, folic acid. They'll have a little bit of iron. They'll have, since they're raised on more fiber, they'll have less issues health wise. So when you're talking about eating animal protein, you want to make sure your animals are as healthy as possible and as lean as possible. And the grass fat is going to give you that. It's the same thing with chickens and how chickens lay their eggs too. So you want pasture raised eggs because the chickens are treated better, so they're going to lay healthier eggs, but they'll be higher in nutrients because of what they're ingesting.
Yeah, I've noticed like a huge difference between free range eggs and what would be farm raised eggs. The
Yes.
yolk's almost a pale yellow if it's been a factory farm chicken, compared to quite bright yellow if it's been a um, free range egg. That's
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. You
yeah,
can see it and you can taste it too. There's a big
yeah.
taste difference.
You can definitely taste the difference as well. So you're talking about the vitamins and minerals that an athlete needs. What kind of a difference is there between a therapeutic dose and a minimum required dose? Because kind of going back to omega threes, I've kind of just seen on social media that the having probably something like 2 grams of EPA and DHA has a huge impact on a person's like mental health and just their general health as well. So,
Mhm.
is there anything to that? Is there a minimum dose that an athlete should be taking or anyone should be taking compared to what a therapeutic dose is?
I think so. Yes, there's a minimum dose that you'll hear the RDA. If you ever Google the RDA,
Yeah.
those are recommended dietary allowances. And those are actually government standards for any individual. And that's the minimum that you would need to offset disease. And that's really why they were created. They do not, in my opinion, have any meaning towards athletes or anyone who's just active in general, because we don't want to just avoid disease. We want to maximize our performance. We want to optimize how we're feeling and how we can perform over time and optimize our health over time so that we can be active and feel good for a long time to come. In that case, that's where that therapeutic dose comes in. That's going to be a little different for everyone. And some studies are showing that we need a lot more of different nutrients than we ever thought in the past.
Yeah.
Omega being one of them, sodium being another. So there are things that are coming out now that we know that our needs are so much higher as athletes.
Yeah.
And that's illustrating exactly the point that you're trying to make.
So kind of just staying on sodium, that is something I've actually noticed as well. There seems to be a trend towards having a higher intake of salt in
Mhm.
general now.
Mhm.
What role does an increased sodium consumption play in providing a therapeutic dose to people?
Yeah, well, athletes specifically need higher doses of what we call electrolytes. Sodium is one of those electrolytes. Potassium and magnesium are two others, for example. Calcium is another. So when you say, a lot of people are really familiar with electrolyte products now that are the little supplements that you put in your
Yeah.
water and it adds those electrolytes to your water, which is really helpful because what it does is helps your muscles absorb the water so that you can get and stay hydrated. So, for example, you could drink water all day long. And if your diet's not high enough in these electrolytes, it's just passing through you. Your body's not necessarily holding on to it. What we
Okay.
want, especially as athletes, since we're sweating every day, we're losing a lot of fluid and we're losing electrolytes in our sweat. We need to replace those. in order to optimize hydration. So again, we really, in most cases, athletes are eating healthy-ish in
Yeah.
most cases, which means that our intake of sodium is very low. Our intake of magnesium and potassium and calcium are probably higher, but sodium is lower because we're eating healthy. We don't eat a lot of processed foods. We don't eat a lot of things that are in boxes. We're eating fresh fruits and vegetables and meats, which are lower in sodium. So our needs of supplemental sodium a little bit higher because we need to make sure that we're hydrating ourselves properly.
Okay. So kind of just staying on that again, what different types of supplements are there that you can take, as in the different versions of it? So you're talking about um, electrolytes. So magnesium, there's a bunch of different versions of it that you can just buy now. You've got
Mhm.
magnesium oxide, glycinate, threonate,
Mhm.
citrate. So which are the best versions that you should be taking?
Really depends on your needs. I think in general, we need all of the versions for different reasons. One will help us sleep, one's going to help with stress reduction, one will help with muscle cramping. And, but now, if you're taking a supplement of magnesium and not just getting it from food, you can get a combination of all those in one supplement. And I think that's helpful from a health perspective, just a general recommendation. If it was an athlete that was dealing with one or the other issues, I may say, let's try one supplement over the other, but I really like combining them so that you really get the benefits of all.
Yeah, okay. So the athletes that you work with, what kind of training protocols do you normally follow for someone who's a triathlete?
Training protocols, meaning nutritional training protocols.
Nutritional and just the physical training as well.
Oh, okay. Well, gosh, it just that really depends because if you're, say, a triathlete and you're training for a short distance race, so say like a sprint or an Olympic, which is not super short, but we consider those shorter distance, your training regimens are going to be a little bit different. You're really going to be more based on speed work, some overall endurance training, but mostly fine tuning your speed. Then when you're dealing with longer triathlons, the half Ironman, the full Ironman, and now there's many athletes that are doing double Ironman training, that's going to be a lot of more
Sorry,
slower.
is that two Ironmans in a row?
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
wow, I didn't know that was even a thing.
Yeah, and it takes place over 2 days. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've seen videos of just regular Ironmans, and that looks tough enough.
I know, right? Can you imagine doing two? So it's pretty crazy.
So,
Um,
so actually, how does someone train for two Ironmans in a row?
you train the same way you would for an Ironman, but you would definitely increase your volume. So you would be doing, maybe 1.5 to 2 times the training that you would be doing for Ironman, depending on the person. Depends on how much the person can withstand too, because you have a lot of athletes who say can't run beyond a certain distance without getting injured.
Yeah.
Or and that's when you want to dial it back and focus more on weekly volume rather
Okay.
than just one single bout. So training definitely varies based on the individual, and it also is based on recovery. So if I have an athlete who needs a week to recover from a long session,
Yeah.
then their training is going to look different than someone who bounces back in a day or two, and that could be age related or that can just be genetics.
Okay. So, does training for volume have the biggest impact in performance compared to, um, say, just one long session every week?
I like to think, and this is my experience and my opinion, but I like to look at weekly volume. I think
Okay.
the load that your body can handle on a weekly basis translates really well to fitness during that week, and not only endurance based fitness, but also speed. A high volume of training really translates well to speed over time. Also, I have so many people who will train for an Ironman, let's say, and then after a month after the Ironman, they'll do a sprint and they'll always PR because they have
Okay.
such a base of training that now that when they're doing a short, fast workout, they're in such magnificent shape that they can just nail it.
Okay, so for something like muscle building,
Mhm.
what would you say is better? Would you say training for volume is better or training to failure?
Failure. I mean, ultimately, it has to be a combination. But
Okay,
if we want to build lean muscle mass, then
yeah,
we need to break down those muscle fibers so that your body can rebuild. And that's actually where nutrition comes in. So, anytime we're
yeah,
training for anything, really, we're having microscopic breakdowns in our muscle mass. And that sounds bad, but it's actually good. And that's where we feel a little soreness, delayed onset muscle soreness. But the nutrients that we're consuming are what makes that muscle rebuild. And when it rebuilds, it gets stronger. So each time you'll do it, it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger. And you can see the difference and feel the difference also. Um, so when you're talking about increasing muscle mass, you're going to want to train to failure, not every day, but you're
yeah.
definitely, once a week or maybe twice a week, depending on your specific goals, you're going to want to challenge those muscles enough so that there's enough breakdown / buildup.
Okay, so definitely training to failure over training volume then.
Yeah, training volume. If you're talking about are you just talking about weights or are you talking about aerobic exercise too?
Weights at the moment, weights for now, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, they both play a role and I like doing both to, they support one another. So if you're going to say do 1 or 2 sessions of lighter weights, higher reps, that's going to ultimately improve your muscular endurance, which is going to help you on those days that you're training to failure, give you some more power to do so. So they really support each other, but your focus of that week will be training to failure because that's your goal, is to build muscle mass.
Okay, so kind of staying on that again, do you have any kind of suggestions that you give your athletes for timing the meals to training? So how many hours before do you have a pre-workout meal, and then what window is the post-workout meal normally consumed?
Yeah, so this is really individual too, because everyone's GI tract is a little bit different and our metabolic rate is different. So some people digest food really quickly and they can eat 20 minutes before they hit the gym and they're going to be fine. Some people need an hour. And that's why the recommendations are really wide too. There's a wide range of 30 minutes to 90 minutes before an exercise session to eat.
Okay,
So that's a really wide range. There's different activities that may vary for as well. So most athletes can eat pretty close to a weightlifting session because there's not
okay,
a lot of jostling of your stomach. You're not running, you're not doing any high intensity jumping unless you're doing jump rope or something. So you should be okay. Sometimes people can get a little bit nauseous if they're lying down doing a bench press or doing planks or anything where you're in a lying
okay,
down position. And then you may be burping up food or you may get heartburn or something like that. And in that case, I would back it up a little bit, maybe for like 45 minutes. If
okay,
you're doing a run, let's say if you're going to add a run into that strength session and do like a mile sprint in between sets or whatever, then I would say since you have that jostling of your stomach, I may back that up even a little bit more, just to digest your food, to absorb your food, and make sure that there's not a whole lot of food hanging up in your GI tract, which can create any distress.
okay. So, uh, say if it's a weightlifting session versus a training for a triathlon, does the pre-workout meal ha vary quite a lot, or would it kind of stay the same? Because I would assume that what you need is a lot of carbohydrates before the training session.
Mm-hmm. You do.
Um,
Yeah.
would that change, or would you need more fats if you're going into a triathlon training session?
Um, Again, it depends on the session and the length of the session, but typically
Okay,
we need more carbohydrates during an aerobic training session,
okay,
especially if it's an endurance based one. So if you're going out for longer than 90 minutes, that's what we consider an endurance based session, running, biking, swimming, whatnot. So then you would need a higher percentage of carbohydrate versus proteins and fats. You still need all three. You just need to shift your percentages around. If
okay,
you're hitting the gym for a weight training session, it's not a whole lot of cardiovascular activity that you're doing. So you don't need as many carbohydrates in relation to proteins and fat. You can make it more balanced.
okay.
And that has
Oh,
been actually shown to increase results, lean muscle mass building results, because we're fueling your body with some protein and fat. So you're
Okay.
pre-fueling that activity.
Okay. So what sports or kind of training sessions would fats have a higher percentage?
Beforehand, you mean? Fueling
Yeah, beforehand.
beforehand?
Yeah.
You know what's tricky is we, in general, for trainings, any kind of training sessions, whether it's aerobic or strength training sessions, you don't want a super high percentage of fat going into it. And that is because fat takes longer to digest. So it's
Okay.
going to sit in your GI tract a little bit longer. A little bit is fine. A lot is just going to slow that GI tract down. And if your body is still concentrating on digesting something in your GI tract, it's not going to have enough energy to help you train for that session. We want your body to focus on one thing or the other, not both. So if we can eat something and have it be digested and absorbed, cleared, then we can actually work out and feel so much better and perform much better. If it's trying to do two things at the same time, we're just losing a little bit of effectiveness.
Okay. I did not know that. Fat takes longer to digest than the other macronutrients then.
Yes.
Okay. What what other kind of notable change that you've seen in how people train and with regards to nutrition in the past compared to now? And do you think there's a trend in going to the future in moving on?
That's such a good question. I think people are becoming more educated, believe it or not. I think with the increase, and maybe that's the positive side to social media, just the increase of education and the increase in actually the increase in sports dietitians. When
Yeah,
I started this, there was very few. Now there's so many more, which is wonderful because now we're being able to reach more athletes further and in a better way. So I think that's a trend. People tend to have better knowledge right now than they did say 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we were really still stuck in let's eat 6 plates of pasta before a race. And what we found is, we were just feeling really sluggish and slow. And yeah, that's because we were playing around with our blood sugar curves. And no wonder we didn't feel so great because we were just pounding the carbs and we weren't really paying attention to protein and fat. I mean, I lived in the running world for years and a lot of runners really didn't eat any protein. They just ate carbs all day long. And so that was very unbalanced. I feel like the world right now, especially because there's a trend right now of increasing protein. And so
yeah.
I feel people are doing such a better job at fueling themselves from a protein standpoint. So I'm really feeling positive about that. And I think that's a good trend going into the future.
Yeah, I think like coming from an Indian background as well, protein is something that's been quite vilified within the Indian culture. So
Mm,
you can kind of see there's quite a high level of like, diabetes and obesity and all kinds of
okay.
cardiovascular diseases within Indian communities. And
Yeah.
um, this is based on no research whatsoever, but
Yeah. I think you're right. I read
but
that. Yep.
yeah, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that carbohydrates play a huge role in our diets.
Hmm.
Because growing up, eating like a whole plate of rice would just be the normal thing to do,
Right.
and um, and if I look at my own family history, on my dad's side, pretty much everyone's got diabetes, and no one had any kind of unhealthy habits, so to
Hmm.
speak, that would lead to it. And the only reason I could probably think of is the fact that there was such a huge consumption of carbohydrates, like literally all throughout their lives, that
Yeah.
they kind of eventually paid the price for it towards the end. But
Right. And maybe not whole grain carbohydrates, maybe more refined carbohydrates.
yeah, it would be plain white rice,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Actually, kind of talking about that, what difference does refined carbohydrates versus unrefined carbohydrates have in your nutritional profile?
Yeah, so this is an awesome question because when we're talking about foundational nutrition and we're talking about not vilifying carbohydrates because they're really important to our diet, this there's I don't want to say good and bad, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates.
Yeah,
The good ones are the carbs that provide us not only with carbohydrates but other nutrients. So, say we're eating brown rice, whole grain bread, um, vegetables, potatoes. Those are carbohydrates, pretty much only carbohydrates, but they also have iron and magnesium and potassium and folic. They have folic
yeah,
acid. They have all these other nutrients, vitamins and minerals, and they have fiber.
yeah,
So all of those things together not only help your body with many functions, but because they are higher in fiber, they're controlling your blood sugar. They're they're more slowly absorbed into your bloodstream. Your body can handle them better. If we're eating white refined carbohydrates, white rice, crackers, white bread, bagels, pasta, those foods that have actually been stripped of all their nutrients. So
Yeah.
they're very little vitamins and minerals. Maybe some of them have been fortified with synthetic vitamins and minerals, but for the most part, they're very little and they're very low in fiber. So they're not providing us, they're providing us with carbohydrate for sure, but very little other nutrients going along with it. And then what's happening, because they're so easy to digest, they're spiking our blood sugar, which feels good initially. But then when your blood sugar dips, you feel like you need to take a nap. And you certainly can't perform at your best when your blood sugar's
Yeah.
dipping.
What role does fiber play in regulating your blood sugars?
Yeah, so fiber does a couple different things. There's
Yeah.
there's two different kinds of fiber. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber you'll find in beans, oats, and it actually acts like a sponge. So that's going to help us cardiovascularly because it's going to soak up things like cholesterol or any other impurities and carry it out of your body. Insoluble fiber is the fiber you see in any crunchy vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower. It's the strings that you find in an orange or a banana. That's insoluble fiber. That's actually going to, when we digest it, it's going to scrub your GI tract and keep it nice and healthy. Scrub out your intestines so that we don't have any impurities there. And that keeps you regular and that keeps your blood sugar stable. Well, soluble, both soluble and insoluble keep your blood sugar stable. But because of all the work your body has to do to digest fiber, whether it's soluble or insoluble, it slows down that absorption process. So your bloodstream loves a slow drip of fuel
Yeah.
instead of like one big mass intro of carbohydrates into your bloodstream. It can't handle that. It's just like you can't handle that many bills. So you take them all and you put them in the drawer and you forget about it, or too much homework and you just leave it in your backpack.
Yeah.
But if little by little you can handle better, your body is the same way. Little by little, we can handle fuel much better throughout the whole day than just one big mass of carbohydrate.
Okay. Actually, talking about you just mentioned insoluble fiber in present in fruits and vegetables.
Mhm.
How does cooking vegetables affect the fiber content and the nutritional profile inside those vegetables?
Yeah, interestingly enough, it does affect it a lot. And also interestingly enough, some vegetables when we cook them will bring out some vitamins. So for
Okay.
example, carrots. When we cook carrots, there's a higher concentration of vitamin A in cooked carrots versus raw carrots. It's not to
Okay.
say raw carrots are bad because they're very high in fiber. Once you cook a carrot, the fiber content decreases. When we cook vegetables, we're going to break down the fiber no matter what, because we're actually literally breaking down those particles just like you break them down when you digest them. But that's why I like to really counsel athletes that you need a mixture of cooked vegetables and raw vegetables. So
Okay.
salads and some cooked vegetables with dinner instead of just one or the other, or mix it up throughout the week,
Yeah.
because you're going to have a combination of that soluble fiber with cooked vegetables and insoluble fiber with raw vegetables. So you'll get a bit of both and have the maximum benefit from both of those.
Okay. And is there a limit to how much fiber you can have in a day or in a week, or is there a amount which is proven to have the most health benefits?
You know what? The RDA, like I discussed before, really the recommendation is 25 grams of fiber for athletes. Like our needs are higher for everything. We're really finding out that we need more like 35 to 45 grams of fiber,
Okay.
which, can seem overwhelming if you're not eating enough at first. So I always recommend just increase a couple grams a day. Or even a couple grams every week, nice slow increase over time so that you don't get any bloating or discomfort. Little
Yeah.
by little, your body will adjust. If you go from like 10, most Americans are eating about 10 grams of fiber. If you go from 10 grams of fiber to 45, you will not feel good. So you want to make sure that you're increasing slowly. And then the other part of that equation is water. If you're going to start increasing your fiber intake, you also need to balance that with enough water.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I didn't know about the water. Why is that? Why do you need to increase your water intake along with the fiber intake?
Because fruits and vegetables, just like actually just like carbohydrate. Fruits and vegetables are carbohydrate sources. Most of them are very low carbohydrate sources, except for potatoes, bananas, and
Yeah.
some of your squashes. But they absorb water. So if you're eating
Okay.
them without water, they're not going to pass through your body as efficiently because they don't have the water content in order to be digested properly, and they can get quote unquote stuck, for lack of a better word, and that's what
Yeah.
creates that little bloating and discomfort.
Okay. Do fiber supplements have an impact? As in, is it still beneficial to the same extent as the fiber you get from fruits and vegetables, or is it preferable to get the fiber from fruits and vegetables instead?
It's always going to be a better choice to get it from fruits and vegetables. And that's because there are components of fruits and vegetables that we could never mimic in a supplement. There's
Okay.
anti-cancer properties, there are anti-inflammatory properties
Yeah.
that we can't necessarily get in a synthetic supplement. So while fiber supplements, for example, do play a role, say if you're sick or if you're having some GI issues, they can help certain people. But for general performance, general health and well-being, fiber from fruits and vegetables is the best way to go.
Okay. So what are some of the health effects of not having enough fiber in your diet? Because I would assume that someone who's on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, they probably have little to no fiber in their diets,
Yeah.
considering they have fats as their primary source of food.
Yeah, yeah. So fiber is key for a lot of different reasons. I mean, once we talked about gut health and the amount of good bacteria in your gut is going to decrease substantially if you do not have enough fruits and vegetables slash
Okay.
fiber in your diet. So that's my first thing that pops into my head. The other thing is the cardiovascular benefits. Without fiber, we have very little protection against cholesterol increasing in your heart and in your arteries and veins rather that lead to your heart. And that's one of the risks of a high fat diet, whether it be keto
Okay.
or paleo or any of the high fat diets, is
Yeah.
we're consuming a lot of saturated fat and we're not able to clear the cholesterol properly because we don't have enough fiber in our diet.
Okay. Sorry, is that atherosclerosis?
Yes, yes, yep. The buildup of cholesterol in your arteries and veins
Okay.
is atherosclerosis. Yes,
Okay. So your intake of fiber has an impact on how much atherosclerosis you can build up.
yes, yep.
Okay, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
These
because
are
it
the
literally clears, like especially the soluble fiber, it
yeah,
literally soaks up the cholesterol particles and carries them out of your bloodstream.
okay, yeah, these are the bits that a lot of people seem to conveniently miss out when they're talking about the benefits of the carnivore diet and
And the
ketogenic
other thing
diet.
too is when we're not eating enough fruits and vegetables on one of those diets, we're also not able to maintain proper hydration because we are also missing out on the electrolytes that mainly come from those fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, because obviously, even if you increase the salt you put on a steak, even if
Hmm.
it's something like pink Himalayan salt, like
Hmm.
it's just sodium that's going up, right? The other electrolytes, I'm guessing it's quite a negligible amount.
Exactly, exactly, and they all work together. Sodium and potassium particularly work together to pump that water into your muscles. Magnesium, calcium do it to a lesser extent, but they all work together. So if you have too much of one, not enough of the other, you're already in an imbalance and it can severely cause dehydration.
Okay, so for someone who's just looking to lose weight
Mhm.
and kind of keep that managed, what recommendations would you give them? Obviously, eating below a caloric surplus is probably up there, but in terms of managing it for the long term, what kind of nutritional strategies do you give people?
Are we talking non-athlete or athlete or
Non-athletes.
Yeah. So if we're just talking about weight loss, we want to keep your calories in check for sure. But what's even more crucial than keeping your calories in check is make sure that you have a balance at each meal. This is the biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone who wants to lose weight, even an athlete, really. We want to make sure every meal is balanced, protein, carbs, and fat, as as well as every single day. So it's not just one meal or one day or one week. It's consistently balancing everything that you eat and make sure that there's all three of those nutrients on your plate every single time you eat.
Yeah. Um, what Well, what would you say is the best way to, obviously, when you're losing weight, you probably will also lose a bit of muscle mass as well. But what's the best way to kind of lose as little muscle as possible while you're still losing body fat?
Mm. Yeah, great question. And that's a really important thing to know is when we lose weight, we're losing everything. We're going to lose fat. We're going to lose muscle mass, which is protein. We're going to lose water mass. So
Yeah,
we're going to lose everything. So as long as you know that, it's really important to kind of visualize that we're not just losing fat mass. You're losing a little piece of every part of your body, but
yeah,
in a good way. So if we want to spare lean muscle mass loss, we need to increase protein intake. So that's the biggest key. So when we're balancing those meals, think of protein first. Put protein
yeah,
on your plate first, lean protein on your plate first, and then your body will spare lean muscle mass and lose a greater percentage of fat mass
yeah.
in comparison to protein.
Again, it seems to come back to protein. Protein is the
It
answer.
really does. It really does. And balance. I mean, balance is kind of a boring word, and I think
Yeah,
it's oversaid, and I oversay it, but it's so important because I don't want anybody just to focus on protein or just to focus on carbs or just to focus on hydration or just to focus on good fats. It all comes together. They're all different pieces to the puzzle, and once you balance them properly for your own body and your own goals, that's when the magic happens.
yeah. Um, is there a set limit to how much protein you can consume? Because I think, like you were saying, people are starting to become more aware of protein as a macronutrient and starting to increase the amount they have in their diets. I think most people nowadays probably have 1 to 2 grams of protein in their diets at least, grams per
Mhm.
kilo of their body weight. Is there a
Mhm.
maximum limit to how much you should be having?
There's no maximum suggested limit right now. I mean, I think it's pretty impossible to eat too much protein because it's so satiating that you
Yeah,
just won't be able to stomach it. I'm sure it's happened in the past where someone's overdone it, but your your appetite kind of turns off when you're eating too much protein. That's another benefit to having that recommendation for someone who wants to lose weight. It's really hard to eat too much protein. It's a hard to get. Really, the recommendations, especially for athletes, are like you said, 1 gram. I measure by pounds, but yeah, 1 gram per pound of body weight. So that's almost 2 grams per kilogram ish. I'm not great at math, but that's about where you want to fall of body weight.
yeah,
And I don't know too many humans that can eat more than that.
yeah, yeah. That would be quite a quite a challenge. Um, are there any kind of supplements that you recommend for athletes, kind of moving away from nutritional supplements and looking more into things like adaptogens and so forth?
hmm Yeah, I for in general, and I hate to kind of mass recommend supplements for
Yeah,
athletes because I really do think it's individual, but in general, I recommend to athletes an omega-3 supplement. I think most athletes aren't getting enough omegas in their diet
no,
unless they're eating freshwater salmon 5 nights a week, which again, I've never heard anybody do that. So
yeah,
that one across the board, we tend to not do a great job on. I also think a protein supplement is important. I think it's really hard, just like I was saying, to get an adequate amount of protein in every single day. We may do good 4 or 5 days a week, but then we'll slip on the weekends. So I think a good whey protein supplement is a good thing. Throw it in a smoothie or add it to your oatmeal or something like that, just to boost protein when we need it, especially if we're traveling, if we're racing, if we're on the road, anything like that.
yeah,
Um, Vitamin D is also another one that's we tend to run low in. We get a lot of vitamin D from the sun. Depending on where you live, you may not have access to the sun year round, so our vitamin D levels shift. I would not recommend taking a vitamin D supplement until you got a blood test first.
okay,
If you're not deficient in vitamin D, it's really not worth taking, and it's rare, but you could overdo vitamin D because it's a fat soluble vitamin.
yeah.
So I always test before I supplement vitamin D.
What would happen if you overdo on vitamin D?
It would build up in your fat cells and it could become a little bit toxic. It's nothing that would be super dangerous, but what it can do is it can offset the homeostasis of your body.
Yeah,
And we don't want that. We want your body to be able to naturally kind of filter out things that it doesn't need when it doesn't need it, different times.
Okay. Um, when you're talking about supplementing with omega-3s, is there a amount that you recommend? I mean, or would it kind of? I mean, I'm guessing it does vary from person to person, but in terms of a minimum amount that a person should be supplementing with.
Yeah, you want to supplement with both DHA and EPA,
Yeah,
and most high quality supplements, by the way, are about 2 grams, but it could be if it's 1.5 to 2 grams are the supplements that I usually recommend,
yeah.
especially for
Is
athletes.
that 2 grams of EPA and DHA each, or
No, combined. They're combined.
combined? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I think when a lot of people tend to buy omega-3 supplements, especially, they don't actually look at how much one capsule might contain.
right,
And
right.
then when you obviously do the maths, it turns out you might need to take 10 pills to get the amount that you need.
Yeah, yeah, and absorption rate differs, and you also want to make sure now that we're talking about supplements that a company is third party tested.
Yeah.
There is a lot of testing done with just supplements that you buy, at your drugstore, at the grocery store, and when they're actually tested, there's very little of what they say is in there actually in there because nobody's regulating or they're very poorly regulating these supplements. So you really
Yeah.
want to make sure that it's not only third party tested but also certified.
Yeah, I think lead poisoning and poisoning with other heavy metals is becoming a pretty big concern in a lot of supplements that are being sold. I'm seeing cases of toxicity from things like ashwagandha and Tonka Ali in just some
Yeah,
people.
right.
So I think
Yeah,
that's
because
something.
really almost anybody can start a supplement company now and nobody's testing to see what's in
No,
there.
no. So are there? Would someone on an individual level be able to get a supplement tested by a third party, or do you do it for the athletes that you look after?
No, I recommend certain companies that I know are third party testing their products. And there's two labels that you can look for too. One is NSF, nutritionally certified for sport, and the
Yeah.
other is informed choice. If it has either one of those certifications, you can be pretty confident. You can be extremely confident that what's in their product is what they say is in their product.
Okay. What have you come across supplements that have obviously got things in it that it shouldn't have, or once you've done third party testing before?
I have not personally tested it. No, no, I've just read the studies on them.
Okay. Are those the only supplements that you recommend for your athletes, or are there anything else?
Um, that, those are aside from other things like tart cherry juice or turmeric or food based supplements.
Yeah.
Those are the most common ones, unless I have an athlete that has blood tests that tell me that they're really low in B vitamins or anything else. Calcium. I have some older adult athletes that are a little bit low in calcium. So we may supplement an individual based on individual needs, based on their blood tests. But in general, the ones that I recommended are usually the ones that athletes need the most.
Are there any supplements that can help you in recovery and reduce muscle soreness, or is that just kind of
Hmm.
an accepted part of the training regimen?
No, absolutely. Omega threes are the first to pop in my head for muscle soreness. They will, because of their ability to decrease inflammation, they're going to help control soreness.
Okay.
And also, I just mentioned tart cherry juice, but there are strong studies about cherry juice reducing inflammation and soreness post exercise as well.
Okay. How does it do that? Like
It's
what?
anti-inflammatory. So the cherries have an anti-inflammatory properties in them, and when they're juiced, you can have 4 to 6 ounces of it, and it equates to about 50 cherries, I think. And
Okay.
the properties in the cherries are creating that anti-inflammatory process in your body in a natural way. So it'd be like taking an Advil or a Motrin, and it's decreasing in a different way. I'm not promoting that, but it's doing a similar. There's a similar process, but it's a whole food supplement.
Okay. And also just with regards to sleep and supplementation,
Mhm.
are there any supplements that can help you with sleep? Like, how do you manage sleep for an athlete? And are there any techniques and improvements that just a regular person can make to their sleep schedules.
Yeah. So this is another interesting thing that I'm feeling hopeful about for the future too. I know we talked about that a little earlier, but I feel like a lot of people are much more concerned about getting high quality sleep. And I love hearing that, and just
Yeah.
so much more interested in learning how they can get better sleep. And the reason I'm so excited about it is because when we go to sleep, growth hormone is released, and growth hormone literally recovers your muscles. It builds your muscles. It increases lean muscle mass. It is like the gold standard of recovery is sleep. If I could just bottle up sleep into a supplement, we would all be such great athletes. So I'm all for a good sleep regimen. So here's a couple of things. And you don't necessarily have to do these every night, but maybe on nights where you're a little bit more stressed, or maybe you're going to have a stressful day the next day and you really want a good night's sleep, then I would just be a little bit, more concerned about your pre-sleep regimen. A warm bath before bed really can
Okay.
relax all your muscles. It can do, worlds of good for your mental status just by slowing everything down. We're off the screens, we're off our phones, everything kind of quiets down. I would even throw some Epsom salt into that hot bath. The magnesium in Epsom salt can get absorbed through your skin and help with muscle relaxation. So that can
Okay.
enhance sleep along with muscle recovery. Increasing a little bit of protein before you go to bed. So even if it's having some Greek yogurt or maybe a small little protein shake, protein before bed can also increase lean muscle mass synthesis
Okay.
while you're sleeping, because it's going to, when growth hormone is released and there's protein / amino acids are the building block of protein, then it can enhance that recovery overnight, which can help your sleep.
Okay. Does the type of protein matter? So I've read that casein is a type of protein that is normally consumed at night.
Casein has a sleepy, like a sleep effect. It can, but whey can also do the same amount, the same
Okay.
thing. It's very similar. Um, I don't think it matters what type of protein for sleep, although the studies of casein are interesting. I think like even if it was, leftover chicken sandwich kind of thing, that could work too, because really
Okay.
it's just promoting your body's sleep. Whereas say a candy bar wouldn't do, because that's just processed sugar.
Okay. What else are things that someone can do to optimize their sleep? So
I think melatonin is a big one that I think everyone's either tried or is familiar with. The trick with melatonin is we need very little. I know a
yeah.
lot of athletes are taking, 4 or 5 grams of melatonin before bed, and really we've found in research that the lesser amount is better. So even half a gram to 1 gram is better than 5, because
Okay.
we already produce melatonin and we just want to boost it a little bit. We don't want to override the natural system.
All right. What about 5-HTP? Does that help?
It can for some people. I think the research is mixed, to be honest. We have some studies that show that it does help. We have some studies that show that it doesn't. So I don't think it's harmful. I think it's worth trying. And if it works for you, that's good. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's a guarantee.
Okay. Um, do you use any other optimization methods for your athletes? Anything like red light therapy or sauna, cold plunge? I mean, all of these are things that are gaining popularity, right? So,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much of that is a fad, and how much of that has actual data backing it up?
Yeah, it is so interesting because I think all of those therapies are really, really new. So we don't have a lot of data to back any of that up yet.
Okay.
Red light therapy, the stuff that I've read so far, I'm a fan of. I think that there's some potential there. I'm
Yeah.
really interested in reading some more longer term research on that because I think that can be helpful. Saunas have been around for a little bit longer. And I think in terms of recovery and relaxation, for sure, I think there's some positive benefits. I think that it can dehydrate you. So I think you have to be really cognizant of hydration before, during, and after using a sauna,
Yeah.
because the second we get dehydrated, we're going to increase soreness. So we're going in there to get less sore and recover, but you could
Okay.
actually do the opposite if you're not properly hydrated.
Okay. I
Um,
didn't realize that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you lose a lot of fluid when you sit in a sauna. The cold plunge is interesting too. So there's very mixed research on cold plunge, and some studies now are showing that it's better for females than it is for males, just
Okay.
because of the way that we recover. And I can't say I know too much about cold plunge. I've just read some
What,
mixed research. And go ahead.
sorry, what's the difference in how it affects females and males?
When females are recovering, we have more blood flow that is directly sent to our extremities. So our recovery process happens faster,
Okay.
which means that a cold plunge would be more beneficial. Men's recoveries take a little bit longer, and their blood is not shunted to their extremities right away. So hopping in a cold plunge would actually slow down that recovery process.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've never heard about that before.
Yeah, I just read that recently, and I was like, "Oh wow, that is crazy." That, and it makes sense because we're different. We have different bodies. We're different creatures. So
Yeah,
obviously recovery methods would be different.
yeah. I've read that cold plunge can actually be quite detrimental if you do it immediately after a muscle building session. So immediately after like a weightlifting session,
Hmm.
it can cause um, your hypertrophy to kind of stop.
Hmm.
Is
Yeah,
that true or?
I think there's some truth to it, and I have not read anything about that particularly. But what I have read is studies on icing injuries directly after. Usually when we get injured, we just ice right away. And
Yeah,
what they were showing is that there's a delayed recovery when we ice
yeah,
versus when we allow our body's natural anti-inflammatory mechanisms to kick in. So
yeah,
now there's a movement away from icing when it comes to
yeah.
injuries.
Yeah, there's rice is what used to be said, right?
Yep.
What was
Yep.
it rest? I can't think of
Rest,
what the
ice,
other word.
compression, elevation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So actually moving away from that, so actually this is really good thing to get into. If an athlete is injured, say if a triathlete or a marathon, someone who's training for a marathon is injured, what is the best way for them to kind of optimize their recovery, make sure they can heal a lot faster, and kind
Mhm.
of get back into training as soon as possible?
Yeah. I think it depends on if it's a muscle injury, a bone injury, a joint injury. But let's just pick one. Let's just say a muscle injury.
Yeah.
I recently pulled my hamstring, so that's why I'm saying that. So for
Okay.
for an athlete who has a muscle injury, uh, rest, believe it or not, is not the best. Now, we do not want to go out and do, 100-meter sprints
Yeah.
either, because we're going to enhance the way that muscle is working and maybe injure it even more. But you still want movement. We want movement because when we move, there's a blood flow that happens. And when blood flow is delivered to that injured muscle, there's going to be nutrients in that blood because we're eating really well that are going to be delivered to that injury and help healing faster right away and continuously. So we do
Okay.
want to do things like yoga, walking, swimming, perhaps, maybe some non weight bearing exercise just to continue the blood flow to that area. The
Okay.
second thing I would do is boost all of the nutrients we need because now not only we may not be as active because we're injured, we brought our volume down. A lot of athletes think since I'm not working out as much, I should stop eating as much. And that
Yeah.
is far from the truth. We actually need to eat more because now that injury is requiring an enhanced amount of nutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins,
Okay.
vitamins, minerals, water, electrolytes,
Yeah.
even fiber to some degree, just to carry all the nutrients that it needs to get there and start doing its thing from a healing
Okay.
perspective.
Yeah, I think that might be something a lot of people kind of miss,
Mhm.
making sure that your nutrition is still kind of kept the same or even more to aid in the recovery.
Yeah, yeah. So many athletes come to me and they're like, I injured myself last week, but I haven't eaten more than 1,200 calories because I'm afraid uh, I'm going to gain weight or whatever because now I'm not working out. And that's 1,000% the opposite thing you need to do.
Okay, wow. Okay, yeah, I've never actually thought of that, but that makes complete sense when you think about it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I, what other strategies do you use for um, injury healing and improvement? Do you use any peptides or collagen? Uh,
Yeah, yep. I always recommend some collagen peptides. Again, the research is mixed on that, and it's
yeah.
not a complete protein. I actually would rather an athlete eat all their essential amino acids in a protein, so like chicken, fish, beef, even a protein powder, just so we can get all of the amino acids we need. But as long
Yeah.
as those needs are being met, then I'll add collagen, say to like your coffee or something in the morning, because that's going to
Yeah.
help. Um, I love athletes to get massage when they're injured, and that comes back to the blood flow.
Yeah.
Just like movement, massage, heat, like a red light heat therapy pad is wonderful for healing
Okay.
and for regenerating some of the cells that have been damaged. Hydration, because now that we're eating all the nutrients that we need and more of them, we need water to actually deliver that to your injured site, and blood is going to be that delivery method. And if your blood is not as hydrated as it needs to be, not all those nutrients will get delivered.
Okay. I think we'll probably start wrapping up soon if that's all right with you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So kind of just for a normal person who probably has a desk job and, might go to the gym like 3 to 5 days a week, which is
Hmm.
kind of what seems to be everyone seems to be kind of going in that direction now, where
Hmm.
people are looking after their health a lot more.
Yeah.
What are some strategies you would recommend to optimize a person's nutrition? Because we talked about you making sure you have a balanced meal, so balanced proteins, carbohydrates, and fats.
Mhm.
Is there anything beyond that you'd recommend?
I think it's more of the same thing that we've been talking about. So even though they're not hardcore athletes, like a triathlete or a football
Yeah,
player, weightlifter, they're still active. And I consider that being an athlete. It's just a different level, right? It's just someone who's really concerned about their health and their longevity. So it's the same advice. It's just based on their goals and their lifestyle. So it's still balancing every meal. It's still getting your proteins, carbs, and fats. It's still getting your fruits and vegetables so that you get your micronutrients that are going to help everything work. It's staying hydrated so that everything can work properly and that you feel good. Being hydrated gives you a lot of energy. And that way you have energy for anything, whether it's a trip to the gym, the aerobics class, the walk with your friends, the hikes
yeah.
on the weekend, or whether it's just feeling good sitting at your desk concentrating, having meetings with colleagues. It's mental fitness also. And we need nutrients to fuel that just as much as we do hardcore exercise.
And kind of just staying on that as well. What is a minimum kind of physical exercise you would recommend a person to take in a week to just ensure that they stay as healthy as possible?
Yeah, I think general recommendations are 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, or I think it's
Yeah,
technically 3 to 5 days a week. I would err on even recommending a little bit more than that. I think 30 days, 6 days, 30 minutes rather, 6 days a week is going to be more beneficial for overall health. But then on the same note, if it's somebody that's starting from zero, then I would meet them where they were and just say, let's do 10 minutes of something that you enjoy so that you your habits start to form and
yeah,
then build from there. Because you're not someone is going from zero and you tell them to do 30, that's going to be really hard. But if
yeah,
someone's starting from zero and now you're having them do like 10 minutes of a yoga class or a yoga app, then that's going to be doable and manageable. And then on the same note, if it's someone that's doing 30 minutes already 3 times a week, well, let's bring it up to 4 times a week and see how you feel.
yeah.
Just kind of increase a little bit from where you are, and you'll notice that you feel 10 times better.
Are there any interesting studies that are being conducted or that are going to come out in the future regarding optimizing nutrition for athletes or just in general? Is there anything that you can think of? Rather,
Off the top of my head, nothing that I know that's ongoing. I think there's so many studies on sports nutrition. I just can't pinpoint anyone specifically right now. I think right now I know that there's a ton of studies on protein
yeah,
because that's what everyone's interested in. So, there's studies on how much protein we really need, how often, protein supplements, are they as effective as food? Those types of studies. I think
yeah.
that there's going to be more and more of those coming out as well.
Do you reckon there's going to be a kind of point where obviously, like even here now in the shops, you're seeing loads of protein shakes, protein yogurts,
Hmm.
everything seems to have a lot of protein in it. Do you think there should be any kind of concern for the source of those protein of the protein, because obviously um, this is mass manufactured, right? So is there
Yeah.
any reason to be concerned about where the sources are coming from?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm always concerned about supplements in general because I feel like it kind of borders on the fad diet that we were talking about. I
Yeah,
feel like when we come out with new recommendations, then all these companies come out with products, right? Because
yeah,
they're going to make money on it, and we're so desperate to find new products that they know that, so things come out. So, for example, the whole plant based, um, I don't want to say theory, but plant based. I don't even want to say fad because I love the fat. I mean, our diets need to be plant based, but people are taking that to the next level, saying, okay, let's make plant based yogurts and plant based this and that. Well,
yeah,
although they're very low in protein, first of all, and there's a lot of synthetic plant based products out there, or even soy products. There's a lot of synthetic soy products out there
yeah,
that may or may not be harmful to us. So that's when I like to just back it all up and say, okay, let's leave the products on the shelf and get back to a whole food diet because that's where your body's going to function the best. We already know that. I know it's very boring to say something like that, but it's the truth. And then use supplements as needed. We probably don't need a whole lot of throw a whole lot of supplements in our body if we're eating balanced and proper amounts and timing appropriate to your body. Maybe you might need a supplement when you're traveling. Maybe you might need a supplement when you're sick.
yeah,
Maybe you might need a supplement when you're training for something really big. But on a day-to-day basis, I don't think we need a ton of extra if we focus on eating properly.
yeah. I think like even with yogurt as well, that you find a lot of yogurts and cottage cheese or anything like that where there's low fat versions which are being preferred now. But I think
Hmm.
probably a lot of people tend to forget that you need the fats which are present in it to absorb
Yeah.
the nutrients and vitamins or minerals which is in the food that you're eating as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep.
I think so. Is protein kind of the focus of a lot of nutritional studies now? Then,
Nope, you just froze for a second.
oh,
I didn't hear you.
sorry, I said is protein the kind of focus on a lot of studies that are being conducted now? Then, like what?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the aim of the studies then?
It's a different aims. So there's aims when it comes to athletes, it's really how much protein is necessary for different goals. So how much protein, like we were talking about in the very beginning, how much specifically protein is needed for football players and how much is needed for runners and how much is needed for dancers, that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah,
does it differ between sports or does it all just come back to the individual? Those are studies I think we'll see coming out more because the recommendations are general and recommendations are still, I think, old school. Some of the basic recommendations that sports nutritionists still give is the zero 0.8 grams per kilogram need. And we now know that that's way too low, but the
yeah.
recommendations officially haven't changed.
Okay. I Why haven't the recommendations changed? Even though obviously you've got a lot of studies kind of disproving that now.
I think it takes a lot of time for the RDAs to change their recommendations.
Okay.
Just red tape. I'm not sure, but we know we have studies to prove that our needs are higher. So we recommend that, but it's not the RDA's recommendation yet.
Okay, so optimizing for protein is probably what everyone should be kind of doing now, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Whenever you make a meal or a snack, you should always prioritize protein.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. I really
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much. This is fun.
It's been really informative. I think a lot of people are going to be, well, anyone who listens is going to be quite surprised at a lot of the information that have come out. I think it's probably quite a heavy period. We're living in a time where things get villainized so much. So
I
I
know.
think
I know.
it's quite important to have a kind of balanced, nuanced perspective on something like nutrition.
Yeah.
Um, like even myself, I was probably in a camp where like I said, I started to view carbohydrates as really bad for you, and then
Mm,
I've gone in a path now where I do tend to take a much more balanced approach as much as I can.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. It's important because the more that you do that, someone else is going to see that you're doing that, and the tables will turn the other direction
Yeah,
now.
brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording now. Well, actually, is there anything that you do you wanna um say before you go? Do you wanna
Oh,
plug
you
your
know what I do is
website or?
I have a free download. Is that okay to mention?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a free download for anybody. It's called Simple Snacks, Meals and Snack Ideas for Athletes. And it's just a free download. You guys can all have that. And it'll give you some ideas of what to make for snacks and meals throughout the day to fuel you the best way possible.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.